Hello and welcome to the Pastor's Wife podcast, brought to you by the Calvary Chapel Association, where we seek to encourage and equip women in ministry. In today's episode, Lauren O'Neill has a conversation with Christa Foote about how the Lord saved her and called her to the mission field. We hope you enjoy today's episode.
Hi, this is the Pastor's Wife podcast, and my name is Lauren O'Neill from Morning Star Christian Chapel. Today, I'm so excited to have Christa Foote on with us for our show this afternoon. Christa, will you please say hello to all of our pastors' wives that are joining us and our guests?
Hi, everybody.
I am so excited to have Christa on with us today because I was just going through all like my photos on my phone, and I realized I was with Christa exactly a year ago in Chile, preparing for a retreat for women in where were we? Santiago, Chile, and that was the first time Christa and I had met. We met at an airport. I was coming with a group of ladies from Calvary Chapel Golden Springs, and we were headed down to do a retreat that Christa was going to meet up with us to do. And so that was the first time I had ever met her. It was on our way to Chile. And then I had the privilege of spending about 2 weeks with Christa. We went from Chile all the way to Colombia, and we got to really know and love Christa. And I know that you are all going to fall in love with her as well. So Christa, please tell everybody where you are from and who your husband is, all the details.
Well, I'm from California, but my husband and I, we've been in southern Mexico for the last 43 years. And so we planted a church 43 years ago, and then 20 years ago, we took over a church in another part of Mexico. So and right now I'm in Mexico. I'm in Cuernavaca, Mexico, and we pastor a Calvary Chapel, and it's called Semilla de Mostaza, Cuernavaca.
So that's amazing. And so Christa just has a heart for the women in Mexico and also in South America, as that's why she was brought on the retreat with us to minister down there with her. And I got to just see her heart for pastors' wives, her heart for the ladies, and to encourage women, in their calling and in the Word of God. She's also an amazing worship leader, and we had special moments of worship with Christa. And so that was I'm just so excited for you guys to all get to know her and meet her. But Christa, first, will you just share a little bit of your story about how you came to know the Lord and how you got put into the ministry?
Well, I got saved at the end of the Jesus movement. I was born in San Francisco, California, but in high school I was in near San Luis Obispo. So the Jesus movement in Southern California was it took a while for the waves to get up more toward Central California. And I think that all of us in our stories, there's these big, huge but God moments. And my parents got married because my mother got pregnant. They raised me in a cult. My dad had multiple sclerosis. He was quadriplegic. My mother was severely autistic. She was functioning, and lots of things that, it's the hand you got dealt, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And but God coming into a situation that wasn't at all optimum. And just kind of like so many people out of the Jesus movement. I mean, you just hear about it. You go to a meeting, someone tells you something, and I became a Christian, and I gave my life to the Lord. And this huge but God thing, and started going to a church. I didn't start it at Calvary Chapel. I actually started it in a Foursquare that was verse by verse. And I always had really awesome teaching from the very, very start. But and so like listening to Chuck and Kay over the years, when he would talk about from the denomination and, knowing that it was Foursquare, I really identify a lot when I listen to Chuck and Kay, because I understand the background. And but I my my dad committed suicide when I was 11, and my mom
Mm,
went off the rails. And that's when that but God moment happened. I was
yeah.
just coming into high school, but so much, so many difficulties because my mother completely disconnected, and she just left me the house. But and she was gone. She just went to find, the love of her life. And so I was a Christian. I invited homeless people to come live in my house with me
Oh, wow.
because I had this house and compassion and everything. And I know that, in the United States, the whole homeless thing is a huge issue now. But,
Yeah,
I can say from experience that homeless people, there are a lot of reasons why people are homeless. And,
absolutely.
in the case of the people that I brought into my house because of compassion, it was, it, uh, it was very detrimental to me as um, just a 16, 17-year-old girl on my own. And one of the homeless people, she got me into bulimia. And another one who came and lived with me, she contacted spirits, and even though I was going to church every
Wow.
Sunday, I was walking with the Lord, but I was exposed to a lot of demonic oppression,
Right.
physical things. And so I when I got to about 18 years old, I'd walked with the Lord for 4 years, and I loved the Lord, and I was a mess. I was an absolute mess. And I went to Keith Green's. He was a singer back in the 70s, very
Yeah.
unique person. And I went to his very, very last concert. He was killed in a plane crash that following week. And he had just gotten together with a missions organization at that time. And he was doing a big push toward missions. And so I went to
Hmm.
this concert, and I was actually at this concert with a guy that I was engaged to be married to. And when the Holy Spirit came on me, when Keith Green was sharing about don't just send money, go. And so I knew at that moment, when God calls you to something, you can't explain it.
Right.
It's completely supernatural. But I knew that I was called to be a missionary. I had no idea about any of the details about what, where. I had no clue. I was 18 years old. And my life was a mess. And it was another but God in his
Mm,
mercy moment. And I think that so many times, people have this idea, yeah, once my life's all together, I'll start serving the Lord and everything, or God could call me, and how God just comes down into one of the worst moments in my life.
mm,
As a Christian, and he called me, like with Paul, he had me faithful, me tuvo por fiel, and he
I
put me
love
in the
it.
ministry, and he called me. So, I said yes. And that's another, just a cool thing, you just say yes, and you
I
start
I love
obeying.
that so much because I think so many times we feel like we have to get to this place of like, okay, I have this in order, I have this in order, and then God can use my life, or I'm not qualified to be a pastor's wife or qualified to serve in ministry. And I love what you said. You just told the Lord, yes, I'm willing,
Yeah.
and
And that
He
and
set
that's
you
what you
off.
do your whole Christian life. I mean, just saying yes, and yes every day you get up and say yes, God. And so I said yes, God, and God took my word, took me at my word, and he started moving. And
Yeah.
it was the next several months were some of the most um, just miracle after miracle and deliverance, answered prayer, just provision. And so in that period, um, because I go, God's calling me to be a missionary. And, I was the only one who thought so, that, I was 18 years old. And I think if my 18-year-old self came to me now as, this experienced pastor's wife, and said, God's calling me to be a missionary, I would have looked at my younger self and said, you're out of your mind. You are such a mess. And I would have never thought myself to be a candidate, and that's another thing I love, Jesus, when he picked his apostles, they weren't, from he didn't go to the rabbi school, and he didn't, get the most equipped. He called who he called. He called people who would say yes.
He
And
qualifies the called.
Exactly. And so I started going to anything that was missions oriented. I just go, well, let's just find out. And so there was a man who was up from being a missionary in Mexico, and some mutual friends said, why don't you talk to this man? I was going to college, and I go, well, I have to quit college. And my mom and my family were like, what are you doing? You're out of your mind. And so talk to this missionary, because he went through the same thing. And that was the Jim Foote, who I ended up marrying, but I was still engaged to this other guy, which was, I still needed another but God thing. And, so I sat and listened to Jim, and I was so impressed. I was just so moved listening to him. And I realized, when you're engaged to be married, and I knew I wasn't supposed to marry this other guy, but I was still hanging on. But, being engaged to one man and seeing another man and going, this is an honorable, wonderful man. I just go, I had to end the other relationship. And, and Jim could tell his side of, how we, what he felt when we met and everything. But seeing how if you just say, yes, God, and just go walking in obedience, how God brings things together. And so, I didn't come down to Mexico to be with Jim Foote. I was just like, I'm not doing anything. But God brought this person here. God brought this opportunity. God provided this. And so I did end up coming down to Mexico to work alongside with this man and another couple in Mexico. And just on the parentheses, we on our very first date when I came down to Mexico 40 something years ago, he asked me to marry him on our very first date, and I said no, but of course later I did say yes. And so we married up in the States, and then for the last 40 something years we've been down ministering. My husband was one of the very first Calvary missionaries ever, way back. Calvary had no idea. It was all organic, just like everything was happening. It was a move of God. And so the whole thing about pastors' wives, with me personally, I was 20 years old, and I was now a missionary pastor's wife. And the closest other Calvary pastor's wife was like 2,000 miles away. And it was in a time where we didn't have a telephone. You had to walk downtown to make a phone call. There were no computers. There was nothing. It was just letters that would take weeks and weeks. And so the very first time that my pastor's wife, we were sent out from Calvary Chapel Arroyo Grande, and we would come up and we would visit. And so my pastor's wife, when I was about maybe 26, 27, she invited me to the pastor's wives retreat. And it was still up in Murrieta, not in Murrieta, Twin Peaks. Yeah, it was Twin Peaks. And the first time I went, hearing all the pastor's wives talk, it was like, I finally understood. You're called to be a pastor's wife, and there's no pastor's wife school. There's no pastor's wife training class. There's nothing. It's just like you say yes, and you find yourself in it, and you're learning, on the go. And so the very first time I went up and being so isolated, being all of it, and hearing them talk about the things that I was feeling, even though I was in another culture, another country. I go, it's the same thing, and there was just this huge download of understanding and feeling like, okay, I now know what group I'm part of, and we can talk to each
Yeah.
other. We understand each other. So over the years, I just started taking as I could. I'd start taking other pastors' wives from Mexico up to the States to the conference, and I'd translate for them in the back and watch that same thing, their first time, and they'd go, oh, they talk my language. It was,
Yeah.
seeing that over and over. But as time has gone on, and God's he's been blessing the Calvary chapels in Mexico, and I just here with our local church, I just go, we need to just start doing this ourselves.
Yeah.
And so about 8 years ago, we had our first Calvary Chapel pastors' wives down here in Mexico. Sandy and Bethany McIntosh came down to teach at that one.
Mm.
And we've been doing it about every year and a half since then, and we've done it now. So once, God's really, the pastors' wives here in Mexico, here in southern Mexico, are really united. We have just really strengthened the bonds. And so from just getting to be together ourselves, we started going, well, there's other isolated pastors' wives down in Central America, South America. I mean, we know if women from Mexico can't get up to the Calvary pastors' wives every year in October, in Mexico, Central America, South America, it's even more. So the ladies here and the
Yeah.
pastors' wives here in Mexico, we started, and our first time we went to Antigua, Guatemala, and we had different women. I mean, we just started combing Facebook pages because there wasn't the database isn't
Wow.
even there. You can't
No.
find these pastors' wives. They're lost somewhere. And so we're just combing Facebook pages, and we're like contacting people, and we're just sending out invitations, and they have no idea even who we are. But we're just going, well, we're also Calvary Chapel pastors' wives. And Sharon, during that time, I contacted her about it because I wanted to see if she could come and share and her cancer, and she wasn't at a good
Yeah.
place. And but she said, but we'll send money to bring pastors' wives to it. So with the help of Golden Springs, we paid bus tickets, plane tickets. I mean,
I love
women
it.
from all over Central America. We had several from Colombia, Peru. And we did our first international Latin American one. And then a year and a half ago, we did one in Cali, Colombia. And God just strengthening pastors' wives and the relationships between, and the whole thing because of the pandemic and Zoom. Now everybody's in contact, everybody's praying with
Yeah.
each other. And so, just from coming down and being a lonely pastor's wife who had no idea what she was doing. God's just opened up these doors and really, it's really, really on my heart to find these lost pastors' wives. And I know that they're not lost. God knows where they're at, but bringing them into fellowship and and understanding, talking with other
Right.
pastors' wives, and sometimes you think you're crazy, the things
Hmm.
that you're thinking, that you're going through, and you simply don't know what to do. And to
Yeah.
find out that you're not crazy, or we're all
Yeah.
crazy. And so, but we're all crazy together.
As I was looking through my phone yesterday and going through all the pictures of us in Colombia and in Chile and at the different churches and at the retreats that we were at, um, the picture I that sticks out the most in my mind, you have the biggest smile on your face, and you are surrounded by all the pastors' wives that were in. I believe the picture was in Chile, and
Uh-huh.
I remember it's Chile because we all had our heavy coats on, and it was very very cold there when we went. But that's what one of the things that really struck out to me about you, Christa, was your heart for pastors' wives and encouragement and loving on them and encouraging them in the word. And would you please just talk about a little bit the importance of being connected? Because there's pastors' wives out there like, oh, I don't need to go to that retreat, or I won't know anybody. And sometimes it's a step of faith like you had to do and just, go to the first one, bring the group, but they hesitate. And it's important that we stay connected and that we have each other in that bond. But would you encourage the ones that are just maybe a little bit hesitant to reach out and to be connected?
Um, yeah, one thing that I remember Kay said several times, she goes, never think that people are more spiritual than they really are.
Mm.
And one of the things that I have found, when one pastor's wife talks to another pastor's wife, okay, I was a missionary and a pastor's wife, and I mean, people have this eye, when you say missionary, you go, oh, you're so close to God, and you know how people will come up to you and, could you pray for this need? Because I know that you're closer to God, and He'll hear you more than me, and we know that that's not true, but
Mm-mm.
no one can talk to a pastor's wife better than another pastor's wife, and no one. You can fool people, but you can't fool another discerning, spirit-filled pastor's wife.
Yeah.
And I think that going back to the thing, never think people are more spiritual than they actually are. One of the things that I have seen in Latin America, because I saw it first in me, I'm a Calvary Chapel pastor's wife. I mean, the Word of God, verse by verse, the Holy Bible, that's us. And I got to a place in ministry with the pressures and the discouragement and just all the package, and I got suicidal. And I'm not a depressive person, I'm 4x4, God just made me that way. But I mean, it was awful. And I realized, started this thing where, you'd register every day that you read the Bible. If you read it on Monday, say, okay, on Monday I read this. And if you didn't read on Tuesday, well, just say I didn't read. Or if you didn't read on Wednesday, and I was in a group of where, we would, we'd be checking each other within the church, other women in the church. And I would get to the end of the week and I'd go, oh, I didn't read my Bible 5 days this week, and but because now I could see it in black and white, I go, well, no wonder I'm practically suicidal. And so I had the challenge. I was challenged and I began reading the Word every single day. And if I didn't, it was just there, red mark on the thing. And as I have spent time with more and more pastors' wives, I am amazed at how many, and I have a before and after in the Word. And I've been a pastor's wife, a Calvary Chapel pastor's wife, like 15, 18 years when I had this revelation. And so as I've traveled and met more pastors' wives and spent time with pastors' wives, that has been a really eye-opening thing, how so many pastors' wives are not reading their Bibles. They're not strengthening themselves in the Word. And so we've been encouraging each other. It started in Mexico, and now we're encouraging other ladies in other countries. But, if we hadn't been coming together and starting to have these conversations and be ministering one to another, pastors' wives, you can fool some of the people all of the time, but we need that iron sharpening iron. We need that challenging. I remember years ago too being at a pastor's wives thing, because there's the thing of there's no temptation that isn't common to man, and we also minister. We encourage with the same encouragement that we have received.
Yeah.
And I had gone through a a we'd been through a time in our marriage, that it just I was not in a good place in my head. Nothing had happened, and there was nothing. There was never
Right.
anything. And Jim and I, we talked about it. We were open about it, but I went to a pastor's wives thing, and I actually went. There was a pastor's wife years and years ago. She lived right by Murrieta. They were Calvary Chapel Elsinore. She had MS, and
Mm-hmm.
she asked. We said we'll go together, and I'll drive you. And so we went together. Well, someone contacted her, a pastor, saying my wife's coming in, and I've made her. I said, please go to the pastor's wife's thing, and could you guys pick her up at the airport? And so we flew in together. We just met each other. We never had met before, and we came and we went together, and God knew. God is amazing, and because He put us together, it was a but God thing.
Moment.
She was going through something, and because we were together amongst, this was at Murrieta. There was hundreds and hundreds of us, but God put us together in the exact same situation. And we're just talking, and there's things, she's saying things, and I'm going, and God finally gave me a word of knowledge that exactly what was happening, and we had some serious talks. Now, it
Mm-hmm.
didn't have a happy ending, but there was no one else. And I know her husband sent her to the pastor's wife's thing because it was a cry for help on his side too, because he saw that things were going bad. But that didn't have a happy ending. But there have been that's just an example, an extreme
Right.
example of who is going to speak into that. And there are so many other happy ending ones where you are there in obedience. Maybe you didn't want to go, or maybe, it was a financial sacrifice or whatever. But these other moments of revelation and speaking, and times when I have gone, and when they say, if you're struggling with something, here at your home church, you're going, I'm struggling with something, and you go up to the front to be prayed for. Pastors' wives can't do that, because then all the people in the
Exactly.
church are going, what is it about? Well, I saw and I thought and I think, So I have gone forward at the pastor's wives retreat, and I've said, I'm a mess. I'm a mess. Pray for me. And God has brought tremendous healing in things that I had been carrying for months and months and months. And so, not being part of that, it's like, what other group in the world can minister exactly, and you can't fool them, you can't shock them, you can't bring anything out that they haven't heard before or something similar, and that they've been through it, or they know people who've been through it, and they have the exact words, and they know how to pray for you, and they know what
Exactly.
promises to give you, and they will keep in touch with you. And so, I don't go to the California one very often anymore, because mostly we're going now to Mexico and Central America. But my ladies in Mexico, they don't miss, and they're constantly writing me, when are we going to have another one? When are we going to have another one?
Love it.
Because it's here in Mexico, it is a life preserver. It is a life preserver for these women.
And it really brings accountability. And I've asked people who have had many more years than I have in ministry, what had been the key to their longevity. And one of the main things I get is accountability and staying accountable to a group. And that is very difficult when you are the senior pastor's wife, and, you can't go and like share what's going on in your home, or maybe marital problems with the congregation, or, those that'll bring up questions if you go up for something or for prayer. But this is that time for us to, to collectively come together and to be real before each other, be real before the Lord, and just kind of like you said, lay everything at the altar of the Lord so He can heal and work in us. I'm not saying that you can't go to, people for prayer in your church, but there is sort of a protection that you have to have for your husband and your home and setting up those boundaries. But you do need to have those people in your life that are going to call you out when maybe something's not going right, or they notice that something's wrong with you, that are going to love you and to encourage you. And that's what our desire is for this podcast. And since we can't be together doing retreats all the time, and they're only once a year, every so often, that these podcasts would be an encouragement to the women that are listening, knowing that, okay, you're going to struggle. We are not perfect. We have issues, and there are things that we are dealing with, but in the Lord and in these relationships, we can work through them together. And so that is just, I just absolutely love your heart to encourage the women. It was contagious for me, because after, spending that time with you in South America, it just made me want to pour into pastors' wives and encourage them, and how we can come alongside of them and encourage them in their ministry and in their walks.
Mm-hmm.
And so, go ahead.
No, and for everybody here, Lauren's coming now. We're having another Pastor's Wives thing in Cancun, and all the pastors' wives are going to supper in Cancun, and some of their husbands are coming along too to supper, and Lauren is going to be coming down teaching, and we're getting women from Central America, South America, and we're just praying for God to provide for them. If they can get to Mexico, we take care of them once they're in Mexico. We find where they stay, we get them around, and so I'm looking forward to that. So we'll get to see each other, you and me, in person, and get to minister together again. That'll be fun.
I am so excited to be in Cancun with you guys and all the ladies. And if you are listening to this podcast and you know somebody in Latin America, in Mexico, we want to connect them to Christa, and get the ladies plugged in, and so that they find that encouragement and that they find these resources that are available to them, because our heart's desire is that many would come to these conferences in Mexico. And whether you're from Latin America or Mexico, we want you to be a part of what's going on and to be encouraged, and we don't want to leave anybody out. So please let them know about this retreat, and you can always message the pastors' wives, whether it's on the Instagram or through our email address, and we would love to get anyone, wherever you are from, plugged into the closest conference that we have for pastors' wives, and so that you stay connected to the leaders in your area. It's so important to have those strong women in your life, and the ones that are encouraging you. You want to have those people in your life that are going to hold you accountable, and then also bringing people along underneath you, and you encouraging those people that are new in the ministry. And so lots of Paul and Timothy relationships going on. So it's a very beautiful thing. And so, Christa, talk to us a little bit about your church. What's going on in Cuernavaca?
In Cuernavaca, well, my husband's a regional pastor, and we do a lot of things trying to strengthen and encourage the natural bonds between the pastors. And it was interesting because there's kind of always been a pastors' conference, probably in the last 30 years here in Mexico. And one phenomenon that my husband has found is, when you send out the invitation to the pastors, they don't get back to you, and kind of like a week or two before the conference, are you coming? Are you not coming? We need to know. And since we started doing the wives, and the wives have real strong relationships, friendships. We pray together, and we get together from far away. Now our pastors and leaders conference every year, they've just started sending the invitations to the wives, because the wives are like, yeah, we're all going, honey, aren't we going? And so, actually that's like our church, every year, the pastors and leaders conference that we do every year is like our local church's favorite event, because everybody comes in with their kids, and we have our church just our people, God bless them, they just roll out the red carpet. They open their homes. It's
Oh,
like this. It's like the kids, all the pastors' kids. Oh yeah, we're going to the pastors' meetings. Oh, I get to see my friends, and so we're strengthening. It's not just this pastor's thing; it's the pastor's family thing,
wow.
and you hear everybody. Oh yeah, this pastors. We're sharing at this thing. We're sharing it at that thing, and not in an administrative or a denominational thing. No, it's a family. It's a
Yeah.
family thing. So Cuernavaca here in Mexico, it's kind of within Calvary. That's one of the things that we do. And our church, um, we've been here 40 years. When we got here, you could not preach the gospel. Well, actually, we were missionaries, and that was
Right.
illegal 40 years ago. The Constitution changed
Wow.
in the 90s, but we would come in illegally. So we were teachers, every 6 months we'd come in and out, and they'd ask you what we do. Oh, we teach, And so um, a lot of time in the early days, a lot of praying and praying and praying, and praying has
Yeah.
always been a big part of our ministry. It's pastors' wives and prayer, or and the word and prayer. But being at a time now in our church where if you would share the gospel in public, it was illegal, and we would do it. We would
Right.
always be doing it, and we did there was never anything like you could go to jail or nothing like that. But you'd be reprimanded. You could be maybe thrown out of the country, and um, not on the airwaves, nothing. And
Wow.
walking through that, and just in prayer and in example, just pushing that to now be at a place in ministry at our church. um, well in our church we have with the whosoevers, the one
Right.
of the ambassadors for whosoevers is our youth pastor, and he's with the whosoever's team from the States, going into schools in all over the country,
Love it.
and seeing miracles open, getting up in the morning and all the doors are slammed closed, and no, you can't come here, and just praying, and the doors open. And we've got a team who's also in prisons. They go in and embed themselves in
Wow.
prisons for a 2-3 day period, and they're in there ministering to prisons, just locally, to just the evangelism within our church, also going to the schools, in the public schools, to such an extent. Happily, the United States has become so secularized, and the whole thing about separation
Hmm.
church and state, and what am I telling you? You live there and you know it. But one thing about Mexico is that it is kind of, it can be Latins are emotional, and
Hmm.
so the parents and the teachers and principals are seeing we're having so much suicide, the drug addiction,
Mm.
the
Awful.
cutting, that they've asked us. They go, please come into our schools. Please, please do events with our kids. Please talk to our parents. And you're always going to find opposition, but it has been amazing. So in the long term, one thing that Jim and we have prayed for 40 years, bring revival. And we know that there have been wonderful saints of God in Mexico before us who were praying also. And so we continue to pray for a revival. The United States has had lots of revivals, England,
Hmm.
Europe, other places have had revivals. And we go before God and we go, God, Mexico's never, ever, 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 ever. And we know that you love us. And, in fact, um, my husband, one early on in ministry, he was praying one day, and he's had one vision in his
Hmm.
Christian life, but he was praying, and he was in the States on furlough, and he just was going, God, have mercy on Mexico, God, and he saw the marriage supper of the Lamb. He's just,
Hmm.
it was a beautiful scene. I won't go into the details of stuff, but it was outdoors, and he was at the marriage supper of the Lamb, and he
Wow.
goes, there were no Mexicans there, and he just starts sobbing before the Lord, and he goes, God, have mercy, have
Oh,
mercy. And he goes, there's kind of like in the vision he had, there was a rising, and then all of a sudden, just hundreds and thousands of people, Mexicans, were running
wow.
toward, and he goes, typical, they were late. You tell them lunch is at 2, they get there at 3. He goes, but he goes, and we're not guided by visions. We're guided by God's promises and by the word of God and by his faithfulness. But it is his will that no man be lost, that all come to
Absolutely.
salvation. And we believe that there's the early rains and there's the latter rains. And so we're seeing opportunities in our church, and we're trying to be an outward church in that sense. And uh, that God has so many more people, that there's going to be just millions of Mexicans, even if they arrive late. We will get there. We will get there. So
We're going to pray for them. Well, Krista, it was an absolute joy having you on today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to encourage the pastors' wives, the leaders that are listening to this podcast. And we are going to be praying for you, for Pastor Jaime, for your church, and the conferences that you have, that the Lord would bless them and keep them and bring many, many more Mexicans and Latins to the, whether you're from South America, Central America, wherever, that the Lord would
amen.
just bring them and do an amazing work in Latin America. So thank you very much for joining us. We are just so, so grateful for your time.
Thank you, Lauren. And I can't wait to see you November, Cancun.
Yes, I'm so excited. It's gonna, not just because it's Cancun, but because you'll be there.
Exactly.
I'm excited for the time together. So thank you for joining us today. We had Christa Foote on from Cuernavaca, Mexico. Please be praying for their ministry, for their church, for the missionaries that are in Mexico, the pastors and the pastors' wives that are working hard to minister the gospel to the Mexican community. So just thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you back next week. Goodbye.